the team I watch every week, so no criticism of rivals. Well, that's no fun. But the best prop at Saints is missing, i.e. Parsi. Best player at Saints is missing, Bachelor. And Johnny, what he has sacrificed to the Red V this year, best player in Super League.
So that's the second mention of Lomax and Passy in particular. So right. Passy has been better than I expected him to be this year. He's been better than he was last year. In fact, a lot better than he was last year. Alex Walmsley maybe hasn't been quite as amazing as he was last year. I'm not saying like for sure that I'm saying he's gone down a notch, but I think he's had the odd game where he's not been as involved or not had as much of an impact maybe or what have you, and he's missed a few games. But I still don't know that I can say Passy should be in the dream team over Walmsley on the basis of Passy's been better than I thought he would be and Walmsley's just been as good as I thought he would be. Because I still think Walmsley's the best prop in the competition. But the people who are seeing him every week, the Saints fans, are saying Passy should have been in there.
They are, and I haven't seen them every week. But for me, that's a mental take.
Well, the one thing I would say is Walmsley's far more involved in matches than Passy is. But Passy probably has more explosive plays. He's certainly like very high up in the offload count this year in terms of total offloads per game, offloads per carry. The amount, I think he's at like something like 16 or 17% of all carries yields an offload or something crazy like that from Passy, which is impressive. But Walmsley makes 40 to 50 more meters a game than him on average, makes 5 to 10 more tackles on average, has a better tackle success rate, has more carries, has more tackle busts. Overall, plays more minutes and has a bigger impact.
Yeah, I understand everyone likes an impact prop. You know, I'm sure you'll talk about how good Patrick Maygo's been at times this year. Everyone likes an impact prop the same way that everyone likes an impact hooker. But sometimes the work that the starting front row does is sometimes missed, I would say. And I think you've talked about the meters, the tackles, etc., etc. Walmsley is head and shoulders above him as a prop. I think Parsy's had a good year, same the way that Connie's had a good year.
I think Parsy's had a really good year.
Yeah, but he's not one of the best two props in the league.
No, I think the Dream Team's got the props absolutely bang on for me personally.
Yeah, I was a little bit unsure about Alechki, but then I thought about it and I couldn't think of a second candidate. So then I was happy with it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
there wasn't another head and shoulders kind of player. There's players who've had individually good games or kind of had hot spells in the season, but I couldn't think of another candidate who was as consistent as Alechki's been this year.
And it's been consistent for 27 rounds. He's one of only a handful of players in Super League this year that's played in every round.
Well,
and he's made an impact, I think, in every game I've seen him play, certainly.
Yeah.
There's been games where he's looked injured but kept playing and kept making a difference. There's been games where he's just stayed on because Leeds were falling apart around the middle without him on. So he's just played as much as I think he's been outstanding. And you look at how many times have we talked about him going both ways as well? Probably as many times as any other player this year in the stats. So, and I know not everything's stats. I know that performances aren't just stats, but I think stats help us understand and average out over a season the things that we know we've seen in game-to-game kind of scenarios. One last fan view. Tom Andrews says, no complaints, happy to see SKD keep his place a god amongst men. But we've covered that selection. I'm not saying SKD hasn't had a really good year. I'm just saying if you could pick an exceptional centre who's played in a team that's made the playoffs and made the Challenge Cup final, or an exceptional centre who finished 8th in the table, I'm picking the one who's helped his team get to the playoffs and has, to me, imposed himself on more games this year.
Yes.
Right, my biggest issue with the Dream Team this year is the halfbacks. And it's not the players who've been picked, but we've picked a guy who's played the majority of his games at fullback, and we've put him at standoff. And then we've picked a guy who's played practically all his games, bar 2 or 3, at standoff, and put him at 7. Now, I know that halves aren't separated out nowadays by 6 and 7 in any kind of traditional sense. And when we do our Dream Team, we just you pick 2 halfbacks who've played in either 6 or 7 position. So, it just seems weird that it feels like what they've done is they've contrived a way to get Jack Welsby into the side, and that's because he's going to win Young Player of the Year again, by the way. But they've contrived a way to fit Jack Welsby into the side, just like I feel like we're going to have to do that for England for the World Cup, where he's probably going to end up playing centre or outside chance, maybe wing, I don't know. But it feels like they've said Jack Welsby is one of the best 13 players in Super League this year. Where's the best place to put him? Because he hasn't played centre this year. He hasn't started any game anyway at centre this year. It's been fullback or halfback or standoff half. So, yeah, that feels like what they've done. But I think there was no clear and obvious certainty to play alongside Brodie Croft in the halves in the Dream Team. I think Lomax you could make a case for. I understand why Saints fans love what he's done this year, because he's basically, it feels like, potentially written off his World Cup to play for St Helens, because I still don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. I really hope he can get that arm through a World Cup, but it's a step up. I don't know. But it feels like that's what's happened there. So I understand why they absolutely adore him, and he has been very good. You could make passing arguments for Sneyd, who's played well alongside Croft. Smith and Cust have been very good in a very, very good Wigan side. Farge probably hasn't played enough games, but when he has played, he's been exceptional. I don't think you can go... Pearce, maybe people could make a case for. I think he's had a quiet influence on the Catalan side rather than a imposing influence, but they've certainly missed him in the last month or so whilst he's been out of the side. So that tells you as much about the player and his importance and his performances, I suppose, as what you see from him actually watching the games. But I don't think there's a clear and obvious one, and maybe Welsby's played enough games in a halfback position to squeeze him into the side there.
Yeah, it feels like that. This is a bit of a triangle between French, Field, and Welsby, and I think they wanted all 3 in the team. I think all 3 had to be in the team, and it was like, well, where do you put people? Because I think Harry Smith had a really good shout at one of the 2 halfback positions for me. I think he's been massively influential at key times in key games. So, and I think he really has kind of elevated his play this year, along with kind of Wigan in a more general sense. So Harry Smith would probably be my second halfback, along with Brodie Croft. Brodie Croft was an absolute shoo-in for me. He's just been brilliant this year. And there's a little bit of recency bias, but I think he's been brilliant all year, actually.
Yeah, I think there was a period of time where some of the stuff wasn't coming off. There was a game where Salford played Wigan and Wigan beat them 20-0 when Croft didn't play. And then there was a game where Salford played Wigan and Jay Field scored that amazing try to win the game like in the last 2 minutes, where Brodie Croft did play. And the difference between the 2 Salford sides that I saw firsthand was massive, and it was almost all because of Brodie Croft. And then from that sort of point on, every time you've watched a Salford highlight, he splashes. Every time you've watched a full Salford game, he does more than splash. He really does show up consistently, just like Jay Field does at Wigan, shows up consistently in what's being done. And it doesn't always come off. He doesn't always get the ball, but is always there doing something and really playing well.
Was there anyone else that you were thinking of that may have been unlucky to miss out?
I think Paul said about Batchelor, I think it's fair to call him out as a player who's played really well this year, but you can only have 2 second rowers, and whilst you're not expecting tries necessarily out of your second row forwards, the amount of tries that Chris McQueen has scored I think is impressive, and then when you throw in the amount of metres that Farrell still makes every week, more by about 20 or 30 a game than any other second rower in the competition. Added to that, he has very strong defensive performances as well. I just think, and he scores a lot of tries, makes a lot of breaks, more try involvements than any other back row in the competition. Callum Watkins is another back row forward, I think you have to say has had a phenomenal year, but again, it's only half a year, really. So would you elevate him above those other guys we talked about? And Reece Martin's been very consistent at Leeds as well. So I think those were players in that position, but that's a strong area this year, back row. I'll save my main issue with the side because it's the loose forward position. But I'll let you answer your own question first. Do you have any people that you think has missed out that should be in there?
I think the only thing I would say, I do have something to say about loose forward. I think we might be saying the same thing, but what I would say is that I think. This is not a slight on Roby, but I think he has been the best of a disappointing group of hookers this year. There hasn't really been a standout candidate consistently. Players have flashed, but I think Roby has won it through consistency rather than being.
He's benefited from Clark and McShane having very patchy seasons.
Yes, and people like.
Non-playoff making sides.
Yeah, and Danny Levi's been good at times. Players like that have been good, but yeah, not quite as good as Roby on a consistent basis.
Levi and Ackers would be the other two that I would be thinking of for that position, but I just don't think their teams get enough profile, whereas James Roby's had all these milestones this year that he's had nothing but profile, and he deserves it because he's exceptional.
Okay, so loose forward. So on 3, I want us both to say the player that we would like to have picked at loose forward. Okay. So 1, 2, 3. Cameron Smith. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And actually, I would have then picked Luke Yates. I would have then picked Morgan Smithies. I would have then picked Joe Westerman before I picked Morgan Knowles. And this is not because Morgan Knowles is not the best loose forward in our competition. Okay, this happened when Sean O'Loughlin kept getting in the dream team at loose forward year after year after year as well. Since Sean O'Loughlin has not been in the dream team every year, Morgan Knowles has been. And I just think the dream team selection panel doesn't understand what to do with loose forward anymore, so they just pick the best player in the competition who is listed as a loose forward, who plays in that position regularly, and that's all they've done here. Because Morgan Knowles has not had a bad season, but he has not been the best loose forward in the competition this year. I don't think. I think I'm not saying he's had a below par season either, but I think there's lots of players who've had way better seasons than they should have had, and have been way more influential on their sides than he has been, and have played more games than him, and have had bigger influence than him. And I just think what they've done is they've said Morgan Knowles is quite obviously the best number 13 in our competition, because he is. And he needs to start there for England. Victor Radley will have to start in the back row, I think. I don't know. But that's what I'm saying. I'm also saying Cameron Smith should have been in this side instead of him.
Yeah, I think we've called out Cameron Smith's name every week, in the same way that we've called out Wormsley's name every week when he's played. The guy's just been a monster for him. So if I'm looking for a player who's kind of elevated themselves, he's the player for me. So yeah.
I also would add Tommy Makinson's a bit unlucky on the wing. I think he's got a better per game try ratio, only very, very, very fractionally, but better per game try ratio than Kensio has. Kensio's got 1 per game. Makinson's got like 1.05 per game or something, but still, I think he gives more. If I was picking a side, I'd pick Makinson over Seo and not be worried about any drop off in try scoring, but know that I've got a better winger. But Ken Seo definitely deserves his place as well for his consistency and try scoring exploits. He's the second top try